Well, good evening. I wonder if I'm sufficiently loud. I think I might be. My name is Josh Manat. I'm the lead pastor here at Cornerstone Church. We have been privileged, really, to host this Engaging the Culture series, and Dr. Jim Carper will share more about the series. But we're really thankful that you came out tonight to be here with us. For tonight, this is not a church building, this is a building. And we are gathered as citizens of a nation that we love to hear more about the things that are pulling us apart. And so I'm really thankful that you made time to be here. And I'm really thankful for our guest speaker, David French, and your time in being here. A few just quick announcements. You should have gotten a response card on your way in. You'll notice on the back of that card is a number to text questions to. So we're going to hear from David and then have a brief break. And then the rest of our time will be spent in the Q&A. And so please take advantage of that. The text will come straight to me. I'll be filtering, sorting, processing in between our little break. But you're welcome to send those anytime. Likewise, at the break, we'll collect those cards from you. And so if you have a question, you'll have some time to write it down. And we'll look at those in-person questions as well. So please hold your questions, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. The restrooms are right out those doors and to the left, the immediate left. If you have, I don't see a whole lot of children here. They might already be downstairs watching a movie. Or if you have little ones that get wiggly, that room right there is actually one-way glass. You can see out, you can't see in. We call it the cry room. If there's any liberal or conservative tears that need to be shed, you're welcome. You can, no. The utmost confidence in our speaker, and I'm really looking forward to tonight. I'll be glad to pray for us and then pass things off to Dr. Carper. Thank you for being here. Heavenly Father, we thank you. We are so thankful that King Jesus is Lord and King, no matter who else happens to be king over our particular lands. And so Lord, the thing that binds us all together as believers is our allegiance to one King, and a desire to see his kingdom expand and grow among all nations. So God, we ask that you would do that in part through tonight. Lord, we thank you for this gathering. We thank you for this time, that you be pleased and glorified and honored, not only in what's said, but in how we respond to what is said. God, would our church be the church tonight? We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Dr. Carper.
So the mic is on. Good evening, and thank you for coming this evening. I wrote out lengthy notes here about our speaker, David French, and I'll get to those momentarily. But I'd personally like to thank you for being here. It's been 3 years since our last speaker was here. Because of the latest unpleasantness, which fortunately I think we are beyond, we are restarting the series, and David is our first speaker. We hope next March to have Dr. John Whitty, who is the Woodruff Professor of Law at Emory University and the Director of the Center for the Study of Law and Religion. He will probably be talking considerably about this coming Supreme Court term, in which a number of religious liberty cases will be decided. So, without further ado, a little bit about David French beyond what you saw on the posters. I will take note that he is well dressed tonight. Earlier he was in a Tennessee t-shirt. Now,
Wait, that's not well dressed?
Maybe in Tennessee it is. But, yeah. Oh, he has a War Eagle. You were born in Auburn, right?
Born in Auburn.
So there you go. But, yeah, we got him out of that Tennessee t-shirt. And I am proud to present it with appropriate attire. I see some of you out there are kind of, but he did share that Tennessee orange is more obnoxious than the orange of the school up the dirt road from us. So, David, you are now an honorary Gamecock. David is a native Southerner, born in Auburn. Has spent time in, I should have said done time, in Louisiana, but spent most of his growing up years in Georgetown, Kentucky. I found out that Georgetown is exactly 20 miles north of Rupp Arena, which may tell you something about his affinity for basketball. Actually, I think Rupp Arena is kind of an ugly place myself, but that's neither here nor there. David confided in me that he has never done much of anything that he just didn't sort of drift into, except your stint in the Army. That he did very deliberately. But he has kind of providentially moved from being a constitutional litigator, specializing in civil rights, religious rights, speech rights, and the like. He, of course, did a tour in the United States Army, rising to the rank of major, and was awarded the Bronze Star for his service in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He writes quite a bit. He speaks quite a bit. He has written for National Review, Time, and The Atlantic. He publishes a number of essays online and through podcasts. He speaks frequently at very different places, most recently Yale, but he's also spoken at Grove City College, two somewhat different places, and he's also done some time at Berkeley. So he's been around the block many times. He is a member of a Presbyterian church in Franklin, Tennessee, where he and his wife Nancy live. They have 3 children, one married, one a student at UT, that's Tennessee, and 7th grade daughter? 7th grade daughter. This is actually the first time we've had a Presbyterian speaking in series, so you're witnesses to a first. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to David French, who's going to speak on a topic that I think should concern all of us, polarization in the pew. David.
Well, thanks so much, and thank you for the gift. I speak in enough places where I'm given enough gifts like that almost my entire wardrobe now is swag from somewhere. I showed up in a Benedictine college shirt that was from my favorite Catholic college in Kansas. Came to church in a TUT shirt, and now I'm going to go home in my Gamecocks t-shirt. So thank you so much. And I'm so happy to be predestined to be the first Presbyterian at this lecture series. So I'm going to talk about some pretty tough subjects tonight. I'm going to talk about, in short, why we hate each other so much and what we as a body of believers can do about it. So I'm going to start with some biography. I'm going to, in the middle, deal with some sociology, and I'm going to end with some scripture. So let me start with the biography, because I've been thinking about this problem of American polarization for a long time, in part because I have lived it in some very direct ways. I experienced some things early in my career that forecast the moment where we are. And I kind of feel like I got a dry run for the moment that we're in now, in the early 1990s. So a little bit about myself as was said in the introduction, I was born in Opelika, Alabama, so War Eagle, to Auburn parents. I don't want to hear one word about the Tide at all this evening. That will further polarize this nation as far as I'm concerned. I grew up in Louisiana for a while. My dad taught at LSU. The first football game I ever went to in my life was at Death Valley. Moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where my dad taught at a small Christian college called Lipscomb University, which is where I went to college. Then he left there and taught at a small Baptist college called Georgetown College, where I was that's where I spent most of my childhood, in Georgetown, Kentucky. So I graduate from high school, and I had a lot of choices to where to go to college. Any college in America named David Lipscomb. And I did my research, and there was one. And so I went to Lipscomb University for college. Now, Lipscomb at the time, and it is still a Church of Christ school. Since I'm in the South, I don't have to explain what that is. If I'm outside the South, no one knows, but it's a Church of Christ school. So I see the nods, especially in, say, 1987, it was really conservative. Church of Christ was, at the time, very, very sectarian in the sense that Church of Christ, and sort of Church of Christ orthodoxy was at the time, was that it was the Church of Christ. It was not a denomination, it was the church. That's something I grew up not really agreeing with. I was a dissident from that view. Didn't know really what I knew as a Christian. I didn't know sort of what brand of Christian I was. I just knew I wasn't that. So I was kind of a gadfly a little bit at Lipscomb, questioning a lot of things, but really had a great time there. It was a great place. But as I said, it was really conservative. How conservative? So in 1988, I joined College Republicans, and our goal was to mobilize Lipscomb students to vote for George H.W. Bush over Michael Dukakis. So we caucused at the dorms. We went in the dorms, we knocked on doors, and we tried to figure out where everybody was. And we came back with the results, and we shared them to see where we needed to target to turn people Republican. And it turned out the numbers were about 85% were for Bush, 10% undecided, and 5% for Dukakis. We disbanded because we thought we can only hurt the cause. There is nothing that we can do to do better than 85%. So why are we even doing anything? We had, morally, it was very, very conservative. You couldn't wear shorts. There were no public displays of affection. No drinking, of course, and which led to an awful lot of conversations about NyQuil, which the myth in the late 1980s was, if you remember, that NyQuil had alcohol in it. So I thought, I didn't want to take a chance because I was on scholarship, so I did not take NyQuil when I had a cold. I only took Sudafed, which of course led to my meth empire, but that's a whole other, that's another talk entirely. But so no alcohol, no dancing. So RAs would literally drive around Nashville and they would look in the parking lots of nightclubs to see if there were any Lipscomb parking stickers. And if there were, they'd take down the numbers and you were in trouble. We had curfews, 11 o'clock every night, except for Friday night, where midnight, you could stay out till then. If you missed curfew in my dorm, you could have potentially a random breathalyzer, which was another reason not to take NyQuil, because we literally thought we'd fail a breathalyzer if we took NyQuil. And so this was my college, and I had a great time. I really did. I had a great time. And it was a great experience for me. I learned, we had robust discussions. Believe it or not, not everyone there was Christian. I mean, some parents would send their atheist kids there to try to get them to become Christian, and everyone loved those guys because they spiced up life. We all were kind of thinking the same thing, and in would come the one atheist student, and then we'd have a classroom discussion on our hands, like, what is it like to be going to hell? And so I enjoyed it. I had a great time. It did really prepare me for law school. So I took the LSAT, applied to Harvard, and by an absolute miracle or a redneck diversity initiative, I got in. And I was incredibly grateful, incredibly excited, and really could not wait to get there. I couldn't wait. I thought, this is going to be the place where I break out of my bubble, my rural, southern, Christian bubble. I was going to be interacting with people that I'd never known before, that came from backgrounds I'd not experienced before. And I really was. I mean, I didn't think at the time that I was that sheltered, because K through 12, I was public school. I thought I'd seen it all, And realized when I got there, no, I hadn't seen it all. I'll never forget, I get up there, I made 100 miles from anything that I knew, anybody that I knew. And I met some folks, and the first weekend they said, hey, do you want to go see a movie with us? And I was, sure, I'd love to. And they said, it's called Paris is Burning. Great, a war movie. I mean, I like war movies. And so I went, and it was not about the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, where parts of Paris did burn. It was about transgender dance-offs in southern Manhattan. And that was a new experience for me to see that. And so I'm in this crazy new world, surrounded by people who quite frankly intimidated me. Everyone around me, they were from Princeton, they were from Yale, they were from Berkeley. I'll never forget the very first day of class. I'm sitting in class, I'm feeling insecure as it is, And the teacher, rather than beginning class with what was called the Socratic method. So the Socratic method is where I just call on you. You know, maybe I'll do that tonight. I'm just going to call on people. And you were terrified of the Socratic method. It was a great incentive to be ready for class. So you're terrified, you're ready for class, and she says, I'm not going to start like that. I want every one of you to introduce yourselves. 120-minute class, 135 Harvard Law students. It was a disaster. So it first started with, hi, I'm Jane, I went to Berkeley, I'm from New Jersey, and then it degenerated into the resume contest. And the resumes were unbelievable. So it just kept escalating. Fulbright, Rhodes, former diplomat, it worked in the consulate in Nairobi. I mean, it just kept going and going. And then it finally got to the guy next to me. This was my only popular moment in law school, by the way. The guy next to me says, my name's Jim, went to Yale undergrad, went to medical school after that, was a White House fellow for President Reagan, left the White House, then was a chief administrator for Massachusetts General Hospital, ran for Congress against Barney Frank, lost, had some time, thought I'd go to law school. Then it comes to me, and I said, my name is David French, I'm from a town you've never heard of, from a school you've never heard of, and the admissions committee has made a terrible mistake. Everyone laughed, and that was it. That was my last popular day. For the reasons that really are relevant to this talk. So I couldn't wait to engage. I knew it was overwhelmingly progressive, overwhelmingly secular, overwhelmingly, just a very different culture. I mean, my student, we couldn't drink at Lipscomb. Our students had beer on tap. Which was the one thing I told everybody when I got back from visiting law school. I come back to Lipscomb and everyone's like, what's Harvard like? And I said, they have beer on tap in the student center. So I knew I was in an ideological minority, but I couldn't wait to engage. I couldn't wait to have these conversations. And so I formed a student group right out of the gate with two other students, pro-life students, called the Society for Law, Life, and Religion. Now, if you ever want to start an organization, think of your acronyms, because Society for Law, Life, and Religion is SLUR. So for the next 25 years, the pro-life group on campus was called SLUR. So I started a pro-life club, and one of the first things we realized when we looked at Harvard policies is that the health fee that you paid to be a part of Harvard included a portion that was allocated for elective abortion. But they had a policy that if you had a conscientious objection to abortion, you could write to school and they would refund a portion of your health services fee. It was a good policy that they had that accommodated rights of conscience. So we wanted to tell the students about it. So I wrote a very nice letter. I mean a really nice letter. I know it's nice because my two colleagues at SLUR made me make each new draft nicer. And in this very nice letter, I wrote to everyone to say, in the whole student body, that Harvard has this policy, but if you want to take advantage of the conscientious objection, please fill out this form and return it, and this was my mistake, to David French, specific box, 1L, HLS, blah, blah, blah. And so this is 1991, so this isn't being emailed to anybody. It's being 1,400 copies were made, and I distributed them by hand to every person's box. Then I go to bed, get up in the morning, go to class, go to all my classes. At about 3 in the afternoon, I go back to my box. Now, just keep in mind, as I look at the box and I see it's jammed with paper. Jammed with paper. Now, I'm pre-Calvinist at this time, so I hadn't understood total depravity, and I still had some idealism left in life. And I thought for a minute, I just tapped into the latent pro-life movement at Harvard Law School. I was exhilarated. And then I opened the first piece of paper and it said, "Why don't you die, you effing fascist?" Wow. Next one, "Go die." Now, I want to be clear, these were not death threats. They were death aspirations. Okay? No one was threatening to kill me. They were just saying, "I hope someone or something does." And it was just an avalanche of insults, death aspirations. It was unbelievable. I'd never seen anything quite like it. I was stunned. And then when I was in class and I would begin to speak and I would raise my voice to speak on issues of life or on religious liberty, people wouldn't just be angry at me, they'd try to shout me down. They would try to scream and yell so that I couldn't be heard. I'll never forget one class. We had a professor. The class was called Child, Family, and the State. And in this class, the teacher would not refer to an unborn child as an unborn child, or even as a fetus. She used the phrase clump of cells, or biologic product. And so one day I just raised my hand and I said, Professor, look, I know you're not pro-life. I know you're not going to use a term like unborn child, but it's not just a clump of cells. I mean, science says from the moment that a new life, that a baby is created, it has its own separate DNA. It's separate human DNA. It's not a squirrel. It's separate DNA. It's not a tumor. It's a separate human entity. And if you're not going to use a term like unborn child, could you at least use a term like fetus, which is at least scientific? Because clump of cells is just sort of propagandistic. I thought that was very nice. But I got about 1/3 of the way through, and people just start yelling. Not yelling words, just yelling. Now, that's not the argument that I was paying tens of thousands of dollars a year to have. That wasn't an argument at all. It was an effort to silence. It was an effort to intimidate. Things got so bad that GQ or Esquire, I can't remember which one it was, sent a reporter to Harvard to write an article about the law school, and it was called Beirut on the Charles. And this was when Beirut was like Fallujah now, or like a war-torn city, sadly, like Kyiv now, or Mariupol. It was. And if I read you that article now, you would think, oh, that was written last week, about the fury and the anger and the attempts to silence and to cancel. It was. I could tell you. I could give the rest of this talk about the kinds of stories. And the kinds of things that people who are of conservative, especially conservative Christian ideology encountered in that circumstance. And so I saw this coming. This was the future American elite, and they were angry, and they were mad, and they did not want to hear from their political opponents. Now, not everybody, but what I saw coming was exactly this kind of anger. Now, here was my problem. As I saw this anger, what it did to me was it did two things. One, it revitalized my faith. It absolutely revitalized my faith. Why would it do that? Well, when I was growing up K through 12, the main challenge to your Christianity in a public high school in rural Kentucky was not intellectual, okay? It was SDR, sex and drugs and rock and roll, And considering I liked D&D and understanding the balance of power between NATO and the Warsaw Pact, some of those things were not available to me. There were not women knocking down my door. I was kind of a nerdy guy who had my nerdy friends. And so I was kind of protected from the whole sex and drugs and rock and roll. And then I went to a Christian college. And so, I'm in this, I had never encountered a frontal attack intellectually or theologically on my Christian faith. And one of the things that I have learned in my life is we don't really know who we are until it's tested. You like to think you know. You like to think you believe you're brave and courageous until you have to be courageous. You like to think you're honest until honesty carries a cost. Everyone thinks they're faithful until they're tempted towards infidelity. You don't really know who you are until it's tested. I mean, we're seeing a lot of this right now in the battle between Ukraine and Russia. Russia has this president, Vladimir Putin, who tries to project this masculine strength. He's on a horseback, he has no shirt, and he's against this guy, Volodymyr Zelensky, who's a former comedian who once appeared in a parody Beyonce video. Like literally that happened, you can look it up. But when the missiles started falling and the shooting started, there's Putin in his conference room 10 feet away from flight attendants because he's wanting to guard himself in the middle of war, and there's Zelensky walking the streets of a city under fire standing with his people. Didn't have that on your bingo card at the start of all of this. You don't know who you are until it is tested. And so for me, this time period in my life was a time of testing of my faith. There was nothing to be gained socially by being a Christian at HOS at that time. But I was part of a Christian community of real life and power. So one thing that happened that was very good, my faith was revitalized. Another thing happened that was very bad. And the thing that happened was very bad is I taught myself a lesson that was this. Man, the left isn't just wrong, but those folks on the left, they're some bad folks. Not all of them, but man, not only am I right intellectually, so not only are my ideas correct intellectually, but I'm on the side of the good folks. So it's the good folks with the good ideas. And that was a position that I maintained for a very long time. Good ideas, good folks. Bad ideas, not all of them bad folks, but disproportionate number of bad folks. It's a pretty comfortable place to be, really, when you think about it. But then as I began to get older and and as I experienced more of life, a lot of these things started to be questioned. But still I had this idea that good folks, good side, bad folks, bad side. And I remember giving a speech at a conservative gathering in 2007, right before I deployed to Iraq. And I said these words that I regret so much. Someone asked me, I'm getting ready to deploy. At the time I was litigating, I was a free speech, religious liberty, pro-life attorney for a conservative legal organization called Alliance Defending Freedom. And someone said, why are you deploying to Iraq when you're doing such good work here at home? And I said at this conservative gathering, you can only imagine the applause I got from this one. Well, I feel that the two great threats to the United States of America are jihadists abroad and radical leftists at home, and I feel called to fight both. Yeah, and then, I walk away. Man, that was a good line. I should try that again. And then I go to war. And I saw what an actual enemy was. I saw what it meant when somebody was actually evil. And it wasn't yelling at me in class. It was beheading people. It was setting living people on fire. It was shooting babies. It was everything you saw ISIS do, except it wasn't viral because people didn't know what virality was really in 2007. And then the other thing I realized was that this whole idea about radical leftists, I had a good life in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My son was born in Ithaca, New York, the only town in America at that time that had a socialist mayor. I was talking about my neighbors, my friends, my best friend in Iraq. My best friend in Iraq was a guy named Leo Broadhead. So here I am, I'm a white, Southern, evangelical, conservative Republican. He is a former Catholic, former Mormon, present agnostic who says he only believes in the Hubble telescope because it sees farther than anything. Now, I wonder if he believes in the Webb telescope now, because that sees farther than the Hubble, but we haven't consulted on that. Who was in on Barack Obama before being in on Barack Obama was cool. And he became my best friend in that incredibly difficult circumstance. Close to me as a brother. And then in not 30 days before, he would have been one of the radical leftists. One of the radical leftists that is one of the great threats to the United States of America. And I got perspective. So I come home, I'll never forget this, we had a great relationship. We would argue about politics you would not believe, and it did not affect our relationship. We had this rule on our base, nobody went anywhere alone, because we had Lots of reasons. You're 14 miles from the Iranian border, you're out in the middle of nowhere, Al-Qaeda is everywhere, you're co-located with an Iraqi army unit, there are green on blue incidents where Iraqi soldiers were shooting American soldiers, and so we know we're nowhere alone. So if I was going to go to chapel, I had to have somebody go with me. Every Sunday, Leo would come to chapel with me. My former Catholic, former Mormon, agnostic, Hubble worshiping friend was right there next to me every Sunday. And so I come home and I'm having this transformation that is called perspective. And I feel like I'm coming home to a country that on the one hand, I'm depolarizing, and I'm coming to a country that is polarizing. I'm becoming less partisan just as the country is becoming more partisan. Where the number one dominant characteristic of our Americans in behaving towards each other, this is the number one dominant characteristic, it is called negative partisanship. Now we're at the sociology portion of all of this. Negative partisanship. So if you don't know what negative partisanship means, what negative partisanship means is I'm a Republican, not because I love Republican ideas, but because I hate or fear or despise Democratic ideas. Or I'm a Democrat, not because I love Democratic ideas, but because I hate or fear or despise Republican ideas. That's negative partisanship. And that is the number one salient characteristic of a Republican or a Democrat in the United States right now. And it's not a brand new thing. This is not just a Trump era thing. So let's go back to 2014, before Donald Trump. The Pew Foundation had been studying this for some time. And it looked and it asked your Republicans, it said, Republicans, what are your feelings about Democrats? Do you strongly dislike, somewhat dislike, neutral, somewhat like, or strongly like? All you know is they're a Democrat. What's your feeling? 82% of Republicans said they strongly dislike or somewhat dislike Democrats. 82%. This is 2014, 8 years ago. Has it gotten better, do you think? No, it's gotten materially worse. Now, it's hard to get worse than 82. Like, there's only so much room above that, but we're moving up above that. Now, the Democrats were more tolerant, as is their reputation. Only 78% of them strongly disliked or somewhat disliked Republicans. So the motivating driver of political engagement has become animosity. Animosity. Now, and it's just getting worse. Okay, so here's one term to remember. Negative polarization. Negative polarization. So we know what that is. Well, how is negative polarization amplifying? Here's another term. I'm going to give you 3 terms to remember. Negative polarization, the big sort, and group polarization. Those are my 3 terms. So negative polarization is amplified by the big sort. Okay, what is the big sort? The big sort is a trend that's been happening for more than a generation, where Americans are increasingly living around people of like mind. In other words, we're clustering into like-minded political communities. You can go on the New York Times website right now, find it, and there's a little tool they have where you can type in your address and you can find out what percentage of your neighbors are Republican, Democrat, or independent. So I am in a very Republican neighborhood. So my neighborhood is 85% Republican. The second largest group is independent. Democrats are coming third, okay? So in my neighborhood, it's not, did you go to the Trump boat parade? It's which boat were you in the Trump boat parade? It is very Republican. Now, I've had the misfortune, in some ways, of only living in deep red or deep blue. I don't even know what it's like to live in a politically mixed neighborhood. I've lived in Midtown Manhattan and Boston, Massachusetts, and Ithaca, New York, and they're 80-90% Democrat. So the big sort means we live around people of like mind. We tend to associate with people of like mind. Now, cities like Columbia are a little bit protected from that. They're a little more diverse, but not necessarily by neighborhood, not necessarily by church. So you're around people of like mind. Okay, so what? Isn't that kind of fun? You know, to be around people who you agree with? I mean, don't we kind of like that, you know? It's like if I go to a Grizzlies game, which I do a lot, most exciting young team in the NBA. You want that arena to be a sea of blue. You know, if you see the random Lakers jersey, you're like, dude, like my son, dude, what are you doing? I just paid all this money and you're wearing a Laker. And, you know, so it's fun. It's fun. It's fun to be in a like-minded community. What's the problem with it? We get to our third thing, the law of group polarization. Now, this is where it gets insidious. What happens when people of like mind gather? What happens is people of like mind tend to become more extreme. This is a reality, and I'll tell you this, if you only remember one thing I say tonight, remember this, because it explains so much about the United States of America. It is that when like-minded people gather, they tend to be more extreme. All right, so let's say this isn't a talk on Christianity and public life and polarization. Let's say this is a rally designed to motivate this group to oppose gun control. Everyone in here owns a gun. After we've had the speech, after we've talked, are we going to leave here thinking, man, I don't like guns anymore? No, you're going to think, I need another one. You know, it's the same thing if you go to a really good Bible study, you've had a really good worship experience. You don't walk out of it thinking, I love Jesus less. You know, you get encouraged by people of like mind. And what is Cass Sunstein first articulated this theory, and in looking at all the research, here's this crazy thing that he found, is that when people of like mind gather and communicate and talk long enough, the entire group gets more extreme than the most extreme person was at the start of the deliberations. It's a stampede. It's a herd effect. And we see this in the data. It used to be that American ideology was like this. It was like a U. Most people were in the middle, right? And there was a few people on either side, and you know they were disproportionately active and all of this stuff, but most people are in the middle. If you look at ideological divisions now, it's going from a U, and it's kind of a line, and it's more, from a bell to a line to a U, where there's more people clustering on each side of the political spectrum. And as we move away from our neighbors, we're looking at them going, look at how extreme you're becoming. And they're looking at us and going, look at how extreme you're becoming. And to an extent, they're both right. Both sides are becoming more extreme. So this is what we have. We have a situation where the driving factor is animosity. We are living around people of like mind, and we are becoming more extreme, not just ideologically, but temperamentally. Okay? If you are around a bunch of angry people, you're gonna be angrier. And so here's our dynamic. And so what this means is that we are ripe. We are ripe for violence. We are ripe for division. Things like what happened on January 6th or the riots that we saw in the summer of 2020 are completely predictable. In fact, they've been predicted. All of this has been predicted. So here we are. The dominant situation is we hate each other. How much do we hate each other? We hate each other so much that there are now 20% of Americans. Now you think, oh, only 20? Well, that's about 65 million people who would be just fine if a significant number of their political opponents just died. It's called lethal mass polarization. Lethal mass polarization. How polarized are we? We are now so polarized that many people, most people, would rather their son or daughter marry a person of a different religion than a different faith. Now that's a good proxy for what your real faith is, right? If your son or daughter, the people you love the most in the world, the thing that you would rather them be is, you'd rather them be with somebody, say, if you're a Christian, with a Hindu than a Democrat, well, then you know where your heart really is focused. Okay? You know what your God is then. You know what your God is, and I'm telling you what, if your God's an elephant or a donkey, those are bad gods. And so this is where we are. But thankfully, of course, there's millions of Christians in the United States of America, millions of Christians, and we're taught to love our enemies and to bless those who persecute you, and that the fruits of the Spirit are kindness, gentleness, self-control. So thankfully, this is our time. We're blazing forth in Christian love and glory at this time, and a tremendous testimony to the whole world, or not. Or not. What are we now as Christians? Partisan participants in polarization. That's what we are. Not everybody. I'm sure I am not talking about anyone in this room. I am talking about all those other people out there. This is one of those prayers where, thank God I'm not like those other people. That the characteristic of American Christian political participation is highly partisan. It's highly partisan. It is not characterized by love for our enemies. It is not characterized by kindness. It is not characterized by blessing those who persecute you. It is not characterized by kindness, patience, gentleness, self-control. It is not characterized by the fruits of the Spirit. It is characterized by bare-knuckled, in-the-mud participation, but it's for a good cause. But this is not how we do life in any other area, right? So if you're a Christian business person and you're struggling, your business is going under because, we rationalize our anger by telling us that America's about to be over if the other side wins, and the church is going to be persecuted, and and then dogs and cats will be sleeping together, and it'll be awful. Ghostbusters reference, no one got it. Anyway, we justify it by this sense of incredible emergency, desperate times, desperate measures, things I wouldn't ordinarily embrace. I got to do it. But here's the problem. When these words were written, like, love your enemies, bless those who persecute you. And Paul is saying these kinds of things. When Jesus is urging us to love, when Jesus is saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, he wasn't talking to a group of Romans with bad tweets. He was talking to people who were killing him. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Love your enemies. Who were your enemies? They weren't people who were trying to raise your taxes. They weren't people who were pursuing policies you didn't like in an atmosphere in a country where you enjoy unparalleled freedom and power greater than any Christian community in the history of the world. They were trying to kill you. They were persecuting you. And love your enemies. Bless those who persecute you. And yet we throw it away. Now, in a business sense, like in other circumstances, even when there's an emergency, we don't act like that. Let's say you own a business and your business is going under. Someone says, well, if your business is going under, what would really help it? A little light consumer fraud. Because, after all, think of all the good you can do with the money you make, and you can give it away, and then when you're able to get through your financial crisis, you can go back to being honest again. And most Christians go, no, I'm not going to commit consumer fraud. God will protect me. God will sustain me. I have faith in God. And they go, okay, maybe you don't do the consumer fraud. You won't lie. But how about you just hire somebody to lie for you? He'll fight for you. He's going to fight for you. And he's going to lie and lie and lie and fight for you. No, you go, no. I'm still guilty if I hired the person who fights and lies for me. Uh-oh. Isn't that what we do in politics all the time? Isn't it what we do all the time? We go ahead and do something we would never do in our personal life. Why? Why do we do it? Because it's an emergency? I don't know. So I remember this Bible story, Hezekiah. He rules this tiny little kingdom called Judah. Tiny. It's Jerusalem and a little bit of land. That's Judah. And here comes the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire. And it is stampeding towards them, and they don't have a hope in the world. But there's this country called Egypt. It's the only other superpower on the block. And there are people saying, go down to Egypt. Go down to Egypt. Make an alliance with Egypt. Make an alliance with Egypt. And Hezekiah has got this wild and crazy guy named Isaiah around him. Isaiah says, trust not in chariots. Now, if Hezekiah is a president and there's an army bearing down on him, and some prophet says to him, trust not in Abram's main battle tanks, I'm impeaching that dude if he says, I'm not trusting in tanks. But Hezekiah, he said, I'm not going to trust in chariots. I'm going to trust in the Lord to save his people. He followed the advice of the prophet and not the political advisors at the time. This is a story we all learn in Sunday school. And Isaiah is vindicated. The Lord delivers the people of Israel. The Lord delivers his people without an alliance with Egypt. And you're taught that in Sunday school from like you're this high. And what are you taught? God protects his people. I guess, but that was the Assyrians, right? The Assyrians aren't half as scary as the Democrats or the Republicans, right? Then you need to make your alliances. Then you need your chariots. And that's not a testimony to the world. That's not a testimony to the world. That's not who we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be the people who understand that a living God, the creator of the universe, protects his people, and that there is no weapon formed against us that can prosper. Man, that's a powerful testimony of faith. And then here's the other thing. How are we supposed to live? Well, we have some pretty simple formulas. Not that I'm a formulaic kind of guy, but I like Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you, O man? What is good? To act justly. Got it? I could tweet that stuff. I'm going to tweet about trans athletes. I'm going to tweet about this issue. I'm going to tweet. And it's not that those aren't important issues. Justice matters. Justice matters. We should be engaged. You don't step away. You don't step away and say, I'm not going to be involved in justice anymore. No, you lean into justice. But then there's more to the verse. Act justly. Love kindness. Boy, it starts to get hard then already. And then here's the third one. Walk humbly before the Lord your God. So that means I got to acknowledge that I don't know everything. That a lot of these things are hard and they're tough and I make mistakes. And I'm going to love you and be kind to you even as I'm seeking to pursue justice. And because I understand that I'm not always right, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to listen to you. And I'm going to see if you have an idea that I haven't thought of. If you have a thought about justice that differs from mine and it might be right. That's what walking humbly means. There's another one, and this is particularly salient for our time. 2 Timothy 1:7. For God did not give us a spirit of fear. Okay. You could just stop right there because you've just eliminated 98.73% of all fundraising appeals in politics. For God did not give us a spirit of fear. You've just eliminated the content of 88% of all political speeches. 89% of all efforts to mobilize Christians in the United States of America. God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power. Well, what kind of power? It's not government power, because this is Paul, remember? They had no government power then, I tell you what. None at all. Not compared to what we do. Power. God gave us a spirit of power that derives from the Holy Spirit of a living God. And love, and so contrary to fear, it's power, it's love, and I love the Christian Standard Bible interpretation, because some interpretations are of sound mind, some say self-discipline. I like the Christian Standard Bible, sound judgment. What they all say together is a certain sobriety of mind. You're not blown and tossed by the winds. You're not whipped up into frenzies and furies. You have a sound mind. Why would you have a sound mind? Because I have faith in the power of a living God, and I have love for my neighbors. I have love for my family, and I'm going to manifest that love through my life. That's not a bad guide for how we lead into justice when we're talking about engaging in politics, because politics isn't just outcomes. We've been taught and taught and taught and taught. What does it mean to be a Christian in politics? It means this issue, this issue, this issue. And rarely does it mean this behavior, and this behavior. But that's different. All other areas like Christian businessman, Christian spouse, Christian student, Christian teacher, we're taught about behavior, the way we interact with other human beings. And so what I would say is this. This is the great opportunity of the American church. This is the great opportunity. In a moment of hatred, in a moment of animosity, where that is the dominant characteristic, and in a moment of fear, where hatred and fear are the dominant characteristics of political engagement, there is one community that I can think of off the top of my head that is told to reject that unequivocally, unreservedly, and absolutely. And it is the community of Christians. It's the community of Christians. So here's what I would urge you to do is think about this. I have a couple of shorthand thoughts in the way I think about interacting with people, interacting as a church. And one of them is this. I think that a lot of a disagreement, you can have a healthy community with a lot of disagreement where the fruits of the Spirit are present. You can have almost no disagreement and have a healthy community when the fruits of the Spirit are absent. So I remember meeting, there's a lot of people really concerned about the church these days, and we all meet at what we call affectionately Save the World meetings, where a bunch of people get together and what's your 5-point plan for making everything better? And somebody says, well, it's this, and it's this, and it's this, and then another person says, well, what's your 5-point plan for making everything better? And I'm at one of these meetings, and it's some of the brightest minds, people you would totally recognize. Their names would just be right, you would, oh, I like that person, I like that person, I don't like that person, I like that person. And then a pastor got up, and it was sort of his turn to speak. And he said, it's Scott Sauls, some of you might know, at CPA pastor in Nashville, and at Christ Presbyterian in Nashville. And he said, I love this, he said, have we tried the fruits of the Spirit yet? I loved that. Everyone was like, well, maybe not. No 5-point plan yet included the fruits of the Spirit. And so here's what I would encourage us as we're thinking about politics, because I do not in any way discourage thinking about policy. I love to think about policy. If you want to ask me questions about policy here in a little bit, feel free. And in fact, feel free to ask me about anything at all that you want to ask me about, up to and including my reflections on the 1-year anniversary of the release of the Snyder Cut from DC Comics, the 4-hour version of Justice League. I've got a lot to say. So feel free to ask me anything. But one of the things that we need to think about have we tried the fruits of the Spirit? Is that what characterizes our engagement in the public square? If it doesn't, we need to reset. As I'm attempting to act justly, am I kind? Am I humble? Do I think that I have all of the answers? If not, I need a reset. And I'm talking to myself here. I have a real problem with the love-kindness part, especially when I open this app that has a blue bird. I can get easily angry. Some folks were asking me the other day, what are some things that you need prayer for? And I said, to be honest, anger. I get angry about stuff. It's an issue. So I need a reset if I'm not seeking justice. I need a reset if I'm not loving kindness. I need a reset if I think I've got all the answers. I do. I have a few shorthands. Here's the best way to know if somebody absolutely has no idea what they're talking about the Middle East, if they say this. I've got the solution. Here's another way to know if somebody has absolutely no idea what they're talking about, the tangled history of American and the deep grievances and deep legacy and wounds of American race and the legacy of American racism in the United States. I know how to achieve racial reconciliation. Now, we walk into these complex, difficult things with humility. And then here's another way I need to know I need a reset. If I got fear in my heart, if I have fear in my heart, I need to reconnect with the power of the living God. I need to reconnect with loving my neighbor. And I need to reconnect with the sound judgment that will, if it is truly sound judgment, make me humble by necessity. So I think of us as, and I think of the church, and I think about this for myself all the time, as just constantly needing a reboot. And the last thing that I will say is that one thing that is so glorious is that I know that the reboot is available. The reboot is available. It's called repentance. It's called repentance. And it's called trust. It's called trust. So I mentioned Iraq earlier, and I just want to tell the story because I love this story and because it reminds me of the God we serve and how his ways are not our ways and his plans are higher than our plans. So I mentioned earlier I was in Iraq. I remember I joined late in life. I joined when I was 30. I joined when I was 36 because I felt convicted that I couldn't keep advocating or supporting a war that I wasn't willing to fight in myself. So my wife, it's a fun story how she agreed to let me do it. But I remember going into the recruiting office. I'm 36 years old, and I didn't quite look like the ninja you see before you now. I was about 20 pounds heavier, and it was like all in right here, and it was not a great look. But they didn't know. I said, I want to be an Army lawyer. I was a lawyer. I want to be a JAG officer. They had no idea what to do with me. Sent me to Fort Lee to get a physical, which I was so freaked out by the whole experience. I almost failed it 3 times because of blood pressure, until they turned out all the lights, made everyone be completely quiet, told me to lie down until I was ready to have my blood pressure taken. And I said, okay now. And they took it, and I passed, and like 50 future airborne troopers cheered at once that this old lawyer had passed his blood pressure test. But I remember, I go through basic training, and no one's doing a training montage of me at basic training, I'll tell you that. But in November 22nd, 2007, I'm 38 years old. I get into the back of a Chinook helicopter in Forward Operating Base Balad with 3rd Armored 2nd Squadron, 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, and I fly to Forward Operating Base Caldwell, where I'm going to spend about the next year of my life surrounded by Al-Qaeda at the height of the surge in Iraq. I remember being in the back of the helicopter, and I'm right over the door gunner's shoulder, and I can see off in the distance these tracer fire from a distant firefight. And all of a sudden, it got real. So real. And some of you in this room have probably experienced this and worse. And I remember being scared. Like, all of a sudden, it's not a big adventure anymore. There's no rah-rah patriotism to it. It's not like, I'm standing up, oh, say can. Nothing like that. I just got scared. And I prayed, God, give me an assurance that I'll live through this. And give me the grace to do my job, to do whatever I need to do my job. And it was like the heavens were shut. It was like, God, am I going to make it through this? And you know how you're always like looking for a feeling like, God hears me and answers. It was like the heavens were shut. And so this is November 22nd, 2007, and the heavens were shut. I remember landing at 3 in the morning, and I do not have a poker face. Play poker against me, you will win. I can't, when the 2 aces come, I cannot suppress the glee. But my poker face was kind of shocked, surprised when I landed, and the commander of Grim Troop comes up to me, later becomes my friend. He puts his arm around me and says, lawyer, that's what they called me before they liked me. Lawyer, if you live through this, this is the most important year of your life. So all I heard was, if you live through this. Like, what are you even talking about here? But the latter part, this is the most important year of your life, was absolutely true. And I remember when I got home, and we had a tough deployment. Of the 780 guys who flew out, we took 100 casualties, 100 total between killed and wounded, lost friends who were as close to me as brothers. It was hard. And I was grieving. You kind of postpone grief when you're there because you're just doing your job and it's life and death and you just got to press through. And then you kind of come home and it just hits you like a ton of bricks. You've never been around so much death in your life. And you're just grieving. And it was one of those, sort of dark nights of the soul. God felt distant. I couldn't sleep. I mean, it was, just ask my wife, she'll say it was just so fun for her. And it was a hard time. And we were in the process of adoption at that time. And finally, in the middle of all of this, we got a packet that said, our adoption placement. And I open the package and I look, and there's our Naomi's beautiful little face. And I'd start scanning through all the vital signs and all of the information, and I look at the birthday, November 22nd, 2007. So the same moment that I'm sitting there, God, am I going to live? Do I even have a future? The Lord was preparing. My daughter was being born. The little girl who would be my daughter in 2.5 years, she was being born. Our family was being grown at that moment. I didn't even know God in His sovereignty was preparing all of this. He was preparing all of this. And from that moment, I've just realized, man, I can do my best. I can try my best, but there's only one God. And He's absolutely sovereign. And He loves us, each person here, more than I possibly could love any person. More than I can love my own family. Loves me more than I can love my own family. And He's the one who's in charge of the universe. So what do I have to be afraid of? Why should I be so angry? There's no reason. There's no reason. So yeah, lean into justice. For sure. Absolutely. But as you do it, love kindness. Walk humbly. And why? And I'm going to end with the last bit of verse from Micah. And I love this as a vision for a just society. And this is one of George Washington's favorite verses. It was repopularized by Lin-Manuel Miranda in the musical Hamilton. But Washington wrote it almost 50 times in his letters. And this was his goal for the United States of America. He said, so that every man can live under his own vine and his own fig tree, and no one will make him afraid. So that is the object of our justice, and that we should pursue fearlessly, with kindness and with love. All right, so I think we have a break, and then we'll do questions. So thank you very much.
Take about, say, 5 to 7 minutes if you need to stand up and stretch or visit the restrooms out there in the narthex, that's Presbyterian for lobby, out there and to the left, and then get back here in 5 to 7 minutes. You have a little white card in your hands. If you don't, one of our ushers will bring one to you. You'll find on one side a request for your email address if you're not already on our email list. If you received an email from me about this evening, you're on the list. If you want to be on the list to be notified of our next event, which will be in March 2023, at least at this point, put your email address down and I'll put it on a list. It will not go anywhere else, I guarantee you. On the other side of the card, you will see an opportunity to text questions to David French. If you're not technologically inclined, such as myself, you may write your question or questions on the back of that white card, and after our little break, hold them up. One of our ushers will pick them up, bring them up here, and we'll see what David does with it. So take 5.
I'm sure there's probably some folks caught unawares. We'll start with a few softball questions that came in. DC or Marvel? I think you triggered the nerd in many of us. Is DC or Marvel in general?
So I can only speak to the movie, the DCEU and the MCEU, because I don't follow the books.
Sure.
But it's definitely DC.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
It's definitely DC. It takes the premise much more seriously.
It does do serious.
Yeah. So if actual superheroes came, we would not treat them like superpowered Kardashians. It would be a cataclysmic event, and DC reflects that.
Okay, fair enough. And hopes for the Obi-Wan series, is that anywhere on your radar?
Oh, is it anywhere on my radar?
I didn't ask about Lord of the Rings. I knew that would be
high hopes, although I was deeply disappointed by Book of Boba Fett. But But yeah, we don't need to go into that because that's a rant.
Okay, no. I didn't want it to be a trigger thing. There's a number of questions sort of clustered around some general topics, and I'm trying to consolidate a few things. What do you see as the path forward, legally, socially, for the pro-life movement? So you wrote an article a while back, sort of detaching it from the presidential nomination. What's the best pathway forward?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. And actually, in many ways, the pathway is very similar whether Roe is overturned or not. Okay, and I'll explain why. So if you look at what's happened to the abortion rate in the United States of America, in 1973, when Roe was decided, abortion was unlawful or highly limited in the vast majority of states in the U.S. Highly limited. And then after Roe's decided, an abortion goes just straight up. From like 1973 to 80, 81, to eventually where by 80, 81, abortion is virtually like a form of birth control. And then it starts going down. Down. It goes down during pro-life Reagan years. It goes down during pro-life H.W. Bush years. It goes down during pro-choice Clinton years. It goes down during pro-life Bush years. It goes down during pro-choice Obama. It just goes down. To the point where by 2017, at the start of the Trump administration, abortion rates were lower than they had been before Roe. So before Roe, when abortion was illegal in most states, abortion rates were lower. Now, why is that? It's super complicated, as most complex social phenomena are, but it's a combination of many things. One, increased access to contraception, in no particular order, by the way. 2, delayed marriage. 3, something that's actually called the sex recession. There was a cover story in the Atlantic about this. People have sex less than they used to. Number 4, and here's where the pro-life part of it is really key, more unplanned pregnancies are carried to term. So more unplanned pregnancies are carried to term. So the overall reality of American abortion is that pregnancies are now more rare, fewer pregnancies per woman, and more precious, fewer abortions per pregnancy. And so that is a long-term social trend. Now, it's not happening everywhere at the same rate. So if Roe is overturned tomorrow, and you all know that if Roe is overturned, that does not mean abortion is outlawed. What that means is the abortion law goes to the states. And the states that sharply restrict abortion right now in the U.S. already have very low abortion rates. Now, here's what's interesting. They already had very low abortion rates before they started to sharply restrict abortion. So the best estimate, if Roe is overturned, about 90% of abortions will still occur. Around 90, maybe more than 90%. Why is that? Because most abortions occur in states that protect abortion rights. Vast majority. So in many ways, the day-to-day work of the pro-life community will continue. And the day-to-day work of the pro-life community is not primarily legally focused. It is primarily focused on supporting moms and kids. So it's one of the most important things that you can do if you want to affect the cause for life is to volunteer for or support a crisis pregnancy center. It's one of the most important things you can do. But the part of the pro-life movement that gets all the attention is the fight in the Supreme Court. But while we've been fighting over the Supreme Court, abortion has been going down. There's still way too many. But it's really interesting to me that as this fight has unfolded over the last 40 plus years since its height, we're realizing what an incredible impact that we can have over abortion rates, regardless of who the president is. And regardless of what the law is. And so, on the one hand, you take great heart in that you have the ability to save lives, even if there's a bad president. On the other hand, it can be discouraging because if we like to think that if we can pass laws, we can fix things. But if you remember in 1973, when abortion was mostly illegal, abortion was more prevalent than it is now. So abortions are so easy to obtain, even in an atmosphere of illegality, that we'll still absolutely have to engage in that person-to-person pro-life work if we actually want to end abortion, even if you could, in theory, ban abortion. So I think, I'm praying that the Supreme Court reverses Roe, because I think Roe is an unjust law. It is not just that our nation does not protect, that our nation prohibits states from protecting unborn life. I think that's unjust, full stop. But I also know that we could have a just law which permits states to protect unborn life, and abortions would still happen unless we change the culture and continue to change the culture to be a culture of life. And so in many ways, if you're a regular, average, everyday person, what you can do to impact the abortion rate and what you can do about abortion in the US is the same if there's Roe or if there's not Roe. It is support women and babies in your community. And that faithful, patient effort is really, aside from these other cultural things, is really what's sent that abortion rate going down, down, down.
That's great. Did you want to ask a follow-up?
Well, as part of that decline due to risk.
So the decline, the question is, so y'all didn't read this. It says chemical abortions. The abortion rate calculations take that into account. Yeah.
Again, we'll go from DC and Marvel to CRT.
Okay.
It's like John. Well, so perhaps if you could.
Well, this is unusual because normally my first question is about CRT. So this is only the third question.
You have a nerd asking the question.
Yeah,
so.
okay, good.
So I think a few questions almost in advance of the question. What exactly is it? Is there any consensus at all yet on what it is? And then as somebody who especially is litigated in terms of free speech, could you weigh in on some of the current legal discussions and realities for public school teachers?
Yeah, okay. You mean in like a few minutes?
As much time as it takes.
Okay. So me and CRT go way back. All right. So critical race theory really started to get steam in the late 1980s and the early 1990s primarily through two thinkers, one named Kimberly Crenshaw, one named Derek Bell, both law professors. So 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw wrote a very famous law review article that defined and articulated what intersectionality is. It would be interesting if you are a super mega nerd, you can actually Google that 1989 Kimberly Crenshaw law review article on intersectionality, and you'll read it and you'll wonder, what's the big deal about this? Because it's a legal analysis of 3 cases, and the point that she was making is that intersecting identities are insufficiently accounted for in law. So she looks at a employment law case where black women claimed employment discrimination. And the court denied their claim because it found no discrimination on the basis of gender, because white women were doing fine, and no discrimination on the basis of race, because black men were doing fine. But what she was saying is there is an intersecting category of women, of black women, that is a separate identity from either men, black men, different from black men, and different from white women. So kind of a common sense argument, to tell you the truth. And then Derek Bell created this argument called interest convergence. So that's intersectionality. Intersectionality is the idea that different identities have compounding effects. And then Derek Bell comes up with an argument called interest convergence. I don't know if it was completely original to him, but he really popularized it. And what Derek Bell's argument, so Derek Bell is very pessimistic about America. And his argument was that the civil rights movement was not born and supported, it was born in the black church, but it was not supported by white people so much because white people had their hearts changed, but because white people were tired of the embarrassment of Soviet propaganda saying that we are not a bastion of freedom because of Jim Crow. How dare you, the Soviets would say, how dare you say we're a totalitarian state when when black people can't even vote in the South. You're not a democracy. And his argument was, when civil rights change occurs, it's because white interest converges with black interest for a temporary period. And that civil rights progress stalls when white interests diverge from black interests. So this is pessimistic stuff, okay? And then the third aspect was that then, if you look at America, you would say that, like as I look at, say, the founding documents, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, I look at them as being in tension with slavery, an irreconcilable conceptual tension. Okay, so if you have 1619 in slavery, and if I'm just boring you, just let me know. So if you have 1619 in slavery, you have 1776 that says all men are created equal and endowed with by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Those two things can't exist. One's going to have to win out over the other. 1619 is either going to have to result in 1776 being wiped away, or 1776 is going to have to result in 1619 being wiped away. But what Derek Bell and others said was, no. If you move beyond the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution, you'll see the Constitution ratified slavery. 3/5 clause, Bill of Rights doesn't apply to the states, so that the American classical liberal founding itself wasn't part of the solution, but part of the problem. Okay, so that's the fundamental sort of skeleton building blocks of critical race theory. Some of which, by the way, I think is insightful. Now, it built from there into some things and here's another building block, which is, if you look at historical scholarship, the entire concept of race, as we understand race, is not some sort of scientific biological construct. It is a complete social construct. Because what was considered white and what was considered black or what was considered non-white has really shifted over time based on power dynamics and things like that, which is, again, an insight that's actually pretty accurate. So all of that is an academic legal theory that has some really insightful elements and I think some problematic elements. One of the problematic elements is that it is very hostile to our classical liberal founding. And so it's hostile, for example, to concepts like free speech. So I ended up litigating against a lot of CRT or critical theory inspired speech codes on college campuses because the hostility to classical liberalism resulted in censorship. Well, here's the irony. Now hostility to critical race theory is resulting in censorship. And what people are hostile against is not, very few people understand what critical race theory is. Very few people. But there are a lot of sort of CRT adjacent or CRT inspired, sort of dumbed down teachings that are very blunt and extreme, that are sort of connected to CRT, but an actual CRT scholar would, what are you talking about? Things like some of these PowerPoints you'll see popped up on Twitter, like whiteness means punctuality. What? Have you met Presbyterians? Or that whiteness means meritocracy. Those kinds of things. And they'll be on a diversity PowerPoint at some university, or they'll make people do things like privilege walks, and a lot of that is sort of CRT adjacent. And so some of it's really bad, some of it's just boring. Some of it's interesting, but people got very, 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 very angry about CRT during the George Floyd era, at the George Floyd riots, in part because there was a wave of intolerance and cancellations that came out of the far left at that period. And also, quite frankly, in part because it presented a pretty ideal way for a racist a pretty ideal way for a racist to take the high ground. And it's called being anti-woke. I'm not racist, I'm anti-woke. Well, what's woke? Well, the definition of woke that you see all the time is basically, constantly, anytime someone expresses a concern about race, they're woke. I've been accused of being woke more times than I can count, and that's news to me. I'm a classical liberal conservative, and no, I'm woke. Because why am I woke? Because I think that there is a systemic legacy of 345 years of legally enforced racial discrimination defended by violence that lingers to this day. That makes me woke. So you have good people of goodwill who don't like to see sort of the divisive worst aspects of CRT, and then you have a lot of people of bad will for whom this is an ideal way to combat any kind of forward progress on race without being seen as a racist, because it's not that they're racist, they're anti-woke. Well, what's woke? Well, anything that you care about race. And so it's a big mishmash. So you get people who are really goodwill people who don't like the extremism that they see from a lot of the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion world. And then you get another group of people who, if they feel bad, they're made to feel bad about race in any way. Like in my community, this group called Moms for Liberty is trying to ban the book Ruby Bridges Goes to School for young elementary students. Ruby Bridges Goes to School. Why? Because it shows actual historical photographs of angry white parents yelling at this young black girl as she desegregates schools in Louisiana. They're trying to get rid of the Norman Rockwell painting, the things we all deal with, which is the painted depiction of Ruby Bridges going to school. They're trying to get rid of a book called Martin Luther King Goes to Washington. I thought Martin Luther King was the I Have a Dream speech was the vision of race that we were advocating. And then, so you're thinking, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then they'll turn around and they'll point at some school in San Francisco that's doing something legit bad. You know, telling kindergartners there's something wrong with whiteness. What? That's bad. But that's San Francisco. Why are you banning Ruby Bridges in Williamson County, Tennessee? And so people are just getting so angry about it. And nobody's taking a breath. And so here's what we're doing. We're passing a whole bunch of laws that, I'm sorry, guys. I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for, too long now. Those laws might as well be written in crayon. They're so broad and vague. And then when you call people out on it, say, these laws, if you actually apply this law, in Tennessee there's a law that you cannot instruct that a creed is bad. I can't say, under the strict terms of the law in Tennessee now, that it was bad to be a Nazi. I can't say it's bad to engage in CRT. The anti-CRT law prohibits me from condemning CRT. That's how poorly these laws are written. And so, and then I come from a conservative movement that always valued free speech. And so for years and years and years, the speech code's on the left. We need debate and discussion. We don't need censorship. And then all of a sudden people are writing speech codes, some of them flatly unconstitutional. About 40 of these bills would prohibit instruction in CRT, very poorly defined, by the way, at colleges. That's unconstitutional. And then people turn around, and then if a teacher is made to use preferred pronouns, they'll support the teacher suing to use preferred pronouns. To use accurate pronouns. Wait a minute. You just said teachers don't have rights in the CRT bill, but now teachers have rights in the pronoun situation. You can't have it both ways. The law of free speech is not that all the good things I like I get to say and all the bad things I don't like nobody gets to say. That's not the way this works in this country. And so it's a giant mess, and there's a CRT panic. This is literally the first Christian gathering I've been to since the CRT thing started where the first question wasn't about CRT. And I counted it 30 plus years ago. I found some of it problematic. I found that people who really wrapped both arms around it were extremists. I found them to be in some ways, a lot of that was incompatible with sort of a biblical vision of there's no Jew, no Greek, no slave, no free. We're all one in Christ Jesus. Some of that but I did not read, I read all the founding texts. I read it all. 5 of my first 6 professors were crits. That's what we call a critical legal theorist. Never once did I feel a threat to my Christian faith. It was a philosophy. It was an idea. I never read like Plato's Republic and thought, get thee behind me, Satan. We need to ban this because it's not Christian. It was a philosophy. It was an idea. There are some things I took from it that were interesting, and some things like a benevolent dictatorship that's in Plato's Republic. No, sir. But that doesn't mean I'm going to now pass a law that nobody can teach the ideas of Plato's Republic. And so I feel like this sort of fear-motivated mindset is really problematic. And the other thing is we need to treat teachers like human beings, not as state-programmed automatons. Yes. Only say what the state allows you to say. Look, one of the purposes, y'all, of public education in the United States, of education at all levels, public and private, the Supreme Court has said that is to train students for life and a diverse, pluralistic republic that features often contentious debate. And if you're saying to K through 12 students, if your feelings are hurt, tell somebody and someone's going to pass a law to protect your feelings, that is the wrong way to go about it. It is the wrong way. I remember I argued with my teachers like you would not believe. And it never occurred to me to go complain to mom and dad about my teachers. I remember going toe-to-toe with my 10th grade teacher. This is probably going to get me in some trouble, but she believed in this is at a public school, she believed in young earth creationism, and I didn't. And we fought about that like cats and dogs in 10th grade. In 12th grade, I had a teacher tell me in my public school in Kentucky that I was a patriotic monkey because of my views on the Cold War. And I didn't think, I'm going to call mom and maybe my legislature's going to tell her what for. I thought, oh, it's on now. If we need to train our kids to be able to engage in robust debate, and sometimes people are not going to be nice, and sometimes they're going to say things that are in a way that hurts our feelings, and it's an ideal way to start getting people ready to act justly, love kindness, and walk humbly. But we're in the middle of a panic. I've never seen anything quite like it. It's really, my goodness. In Tennessee, they banned the book, took the book Mouse out of the 8th grade curriculum, which is a graphic novel depiction of the Holocaust, because of quote-unquote mouse nudity. And then it had some bad language in it, and I'm thinking, do you know public school 8th graders? Are you kidding me with this? But, anyway. I really, really, really want to train our young Christians to approach the public square with confidence and not with fear. I had another question someone asked me at this same gathering not too long ago, where the first question was about CRT. What advice do you give to young students about to go into college or graduate school? And I said, 2 words: fear not. Fear not. There is nothing to be afraid of. There are challenges, but there is nothing to be truly afraid of.
What would you like to see in terms of our party system? So I think there's a lot of folks that found themselves holding their nose and voting for anybody, or some just choosing not to. What do you see as a pathway forward? The general argument is, if you take this particular stand on this issue, this is how you do it. So what's a pathway forward?
So
fix it.
So please. I have two unrealistic solutions, or at least 2. Unrealistic solution number 1 is maybe more realistic. I don't know. You tell me which one's more realistic. Unrealistic option 1 is break out of the 2-party binary. Because the problem there, and I heard, you didn't hear it, but there was which symbolizes that's really hard. And because part of the problem is people of goodwill in 2016 and 2020 and other times, I don't want to pretend that this is only unique to 2016 and 2020, reasonably knew that one of these 2 people is going to be president. And the idea of sitting out when one of the 2 was going to win just didn't sit right with them. And God bless you. I sat them both out. I'm not a member of the Republican or Democratic Party anymore. But God bless you if you didn't feel like you could sit it out. I understand. It's hard, Now, what I have less respect for, and by less I mean none, is defending in your side what you condemn in the other, or ignoring on your side what you condemn in the other. So if you're doing that, I love you. I might respect other things about you, but not that. Not that. And this is one of the things I got really upset about in the 4 years between 2016 and 2020, was not that somebody pulled the lever for somebody that they didn't. They just had a hard choice to make. God bless you in your hard choice. But it was that then they just started to rationalize and excuse and defend and act like a defense lawyer for a politician rather than a Christian with a prophetic voice to a culture. And so that's what I have a real problem. So unrealistic solution number one, break the binary. Unrealistic solution number two, I like to call it the virtue veto. Okay, so I have a two-part test for candidates. You have to pass them both. Because my fundamental view is not one person is entitled to my vote. My vote is not owed to any human being. You have to sell me. And that is, and here's how you sell me. You have to have a character commensurate with the office that you seek. So I'm less concerned if, I don't know if anyone elects a dog catcher anymore, but the dog catcher's philosophy on marriage is not as relevant to me as to whether they can catch a dog, okay? But the more important a person gets, the more cultural influence they have and the more their character matters. Because character matters in dealing with unpredictable events. Character matters in how you approach complex problems. Character matters in so many ways. And I used to not have to make that argument. It was so self-evidently obvious. So the more powerful a person seeks to be, the more their character matters. If they don't have character commensurate with the office, I don't vote for them. Period. But that's not it. You also have to have a set of policies that I broadly agree with. Not everybody, people don't have to be in perfect alignment. Not everybody's as right as I am. But I recognize there's differences of opinion, but broadly you have to agree, broadly advance my political values, and you have to have a good character. That's what I call the virtue veto. So a political party is not, since the two most important constituencies for both parties, think about this, this is fascinating. The two most important constituencies for both parties are the two most church-attending populations in the entire United States of America. White evangelicals and black Democrats. Yeah, so nobody ever for a moment think that, Democrats are the godless party, because the other incredibly high church-attending population of Americans is the foundation of democratic political power, and that's black Democrats. So the two most church-attending groups of Americans are the foundation of the power of both parties. If you said, well, you've got our vote if there's a good person at the front of that ticket. You don't have our vote if there's not. Do you know how, with what such remarkable alacrity in which people would be competing with each other to show what a good guy they are? But we don't do that. We don't have a virtue veto because we have other values we place higher now than virtue. So, for example, the population of Americans in 2014 who was most likely to say that character mattered in a presidential candidate were white evangelicals, 72%. And by 2021, 2022, the population of Americans who were least likely to say that character mattered in a politician were white evangelicals at 30%. What happened? Did theology change somehow? Did the value of character become less important in a 4 or 5 year span? Or did the partisan imperative change? I think, I kind of think we know the answer to that. In 1998, the Southern Baptist Convention passed a resolution on character in public officials, and it said this. Toleration of serious wrong by leaders sears the conscience of a culture, will lead to unrestrained lawlessness, and will surely result in God's judgment. 1998, everyone, yay! You bring that up now, people are like, what? No, that's a Baptist, I'm not a Baptist. And so what happened? What changed? Partisan imperatives changed, and so we changed. And so that's what I think is an awakened church has a virtue veto. We have awesome power. I mean, it's funny, we simultaneously think we're embattled and about to be run out of town, and also think that if enough of us mobilize, we can run this country. We have enormous power. Do we use it for a virtue veto? No.
How would you, and I know you have publicly, but how would you respond to someone, thinking of sort of Al Mohler comes to mind, But how would you respond to someone that says sort of the Overton windows is shifted so substantially, we can't actually participate in politics without making those concessions, that we didn't have to in 1998? How would you respond to someone like that who says, the game is fundamentally changed?
That's just completely wrong. I mean, it's just laughably wrong. Hilariously wrong. I mean, in my head, it's so wrong. Okay, so the Overton window is the idea that the range of acceptable conversation shifts in such a way that some things are acceptable. But that's not the Moeller argument, really. The Moeller argument is much more that just policy matters. It's just policy.
Supreme.
Yeah, it's policy. But the foundation really, so if you want to steel man it, it is really, things are so much more, we are in such a more urgent time that we can't have the luxury of character. Okay, so it's an emergency. Things when people will use words like, George Patton, for example, slapped soldiers, but he still commanded the Third Army because it was an emergency. It was our best commander. We had to fight the Nazis. Well, anytime you're invoking the Nazis, you've got a problem. But the idea that we're in such an emergency is I think a fundamentally, number one, go back to my Hezekiah analogy. Are the Assyrians besieging us? No, the Assyrians are not besieging us. And as a matter of reality, is our religious liberty about to fall apart? No. Our religious liberty has been stronger than it's ever been in the entire history of the United States of America. We have more religious liberty rights right now, formally, constitutionally, than we've ever had in the whole history of the United States. Did you know there is a 11-year winning streak at the Supreme Court where there has not been a single meaningful loss for religious liberty? And most cases were decided 9-0 or 7-2, not 5-4. What we have lost is some power. That's not the same thing as losing liberty. Okay, it's not the same thing. So what has happened is we're in a situation where, is the church shrinking, or is evangelical church shrinking dramatically? No. The numbers indicate evangelical church is kind of holding steady in society. Are we losing our liberties? No. Is abortion rising? No, it's shrinking. Now, are there things that there have been setbacks in the culture war? Sure. Have we had successes? Yes, sure. So what we end up having is a situation where we have sort of a range of normal politics, and then we had a partisan challenge that said, and I keep going back to the Clinton world because I remember it's so funny, be careful where your mind wanders, but I remember when Clinton was caught with Monica Lewinsky and then committed perjury and obstruction of justice, and I remember just being livid at the Democrats. I was livid. Here we are in peace and prosperity. If you impeach Clinton and you sort of cleanse the White House of corruption, you're going to have Al Gore. It's not like you're going to impeach Clinton and get Newt Gingrich. Come on. You just tried to keep Clarence Thomas off the Supreme Court because of sexual harassment, and then here comes a guy who exploits an intern and I'm still mad about this, by the way. Come on. And all my Republican friends were like, yeah, look at those guys. And then I remember thinking, I wonder what would happen if we had something like that come up. Well, now I know. Now I know exactly what would happen. It's just locker room talk. I know it's like, how many, 14 women accused him of sexual predation with lots of, corroborating evidence. But Hillary Clinton, and then we have situations where there's actual corruption in the Oval Office, and if you got rid of Trump, you'd have Mike Pence, not Nancy Pelosi. And it's unthinkable. And this is after we staked out all this ground about character. And now what's the excuse? What's the rationalization? And the way people paint it, it's as if Donald Trump is the last bulwark against sort of the sacking of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. And it's wild. I remember debating Eric Metaxas on this point. He said, if Joe Biden wins, we will not be able to have meetings like this in Christian colleges anymore. What? Are you kidding me? But that's where people were. They had that emergency mindset, and there's a whole industry designed to create that. And here we are, the people of the living God. No weapon formed against us shall prosper. Could you imagine the early church looking at us? They're like, so someone sends him, a guy's walking to the lions, so he's in the Colosseum. He's been ripped away from his family. He's 90 minutes from lion time. And he says, what's the church like in 2,000 years? Well, there's this incredibly, the most powerful religious movement in the most powerful country in the history of the entire world that has the protection of a constitutional amendment that prevents anyone from shutting down their worship is worried about a lot of bad tweets. So we won then. It's all better now. No, actually, they think the world's about to end. Come on. Come on. Even around the rest of the world, they look at us and they say, what? I get emails all the time from Norway, from Britain, from Australia, from all over the country, and they're like, what is happening to y'all? You seem so freaked out. You have 10 times, 100 times the power we have in our nation. And so I just don't buy this emergency argument. I don't buy it. I don't see a biblical basis for it. I don't see a constitutional basis for it. And by the way, this goes both ways. If Trump wins in 2024, then everything's over. No. But we just really are motivating ourselves by that, and we just need a big splash of cold water. Turn off the TV for a bit, take Twitter off the phone, and one of the things I've started to do is ask people that are friends of mine who are the most alarmed about politics, and I say to them, be very specific. And tell me exactly how your life is being hurt right now by either the Democrats or the Republicans. What is happening right now to you? And be very specific how that is hurting you, how it is hurting the church. And oftentimes, there are things that affect all of us, like inflation is bad, or we're worried about Ukraine. But oftentimes what you're talking to is a person who's very prosperous, who has a wife and family who loves them, who has a house that would be the dream of any generation of humanity before now, enjoys liberties that almost any generation before now can't even conceive of, and is mad all the time about politics if they're deeply engaged. And we just got to break out of that. And that's not to say disengage from politics, because remember, act justly. But that's not all that there is to it.
What are some strategies for splashing cold water? So, as you think of relationships where this has gone well, have you encountered someone on the fringes and been able to strive towards a healthy relationship where you are able to have a conversation? What was it that kind of, what have you seen that's been really helpful to sort of bring someone back maybe from a brink of extremism?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here's the first thing to do when you encounter somebody who's all in. Like they're all in on the election was stolen, or they're all in on, God forbid, QAnon, or they're all in on whatever the thing is. The first lesson is don't talk about the thing. Okay? Now, my view is if somebody says to me, I've heard that the election was stolen, what do you think? I'll have that conversation all day long. If someone says the election was stolen, I'm going to tell you how, I will let them say their piece, and I'll talk about SEC football. Because essentially what's happening when you're talking to the folks who are really all in on politics, there's a lot more going on. And what's beginning to happen is that a lot of people, a minority of Americans, are deriving the fundamental core of their identity and purpose from politics. They're getting their community from politics. It's all the people who are supporting Biden or supporting Trump, or whatever the sort of the flavor of the month politician is. They're getting their community from politics, and they're getting their purpose from politics. And if I come in and I said, I'm not fact-checking somebody out of their community and purpose. That's not how life works. One of the most interesting studies that I've seen was if someone's a committed partisan and you give them a fact check, their brain responds to negative facts with the fight or flight syndrome. In other words, they react to negative facts as if they've been attacked. Because it is in many ways an attack. It's an attack on their identity, it's an attack on their purpose. So people write me all the time and they say, my aunt or my uncle or my niece or my nephew is just all in on X or Y or Z. What can I do? And the very first question I respond with, I don't respond to I just respond with the question, how much time do you spend with them? How much are you part of their life? Because the reality is you cannot replace something with nothing. You can't fire or forget a fact check and say, well, it's all on you that you still disagree with me. What you have to do is you have to engage in people's lives and replace one purpose with a better purpose. And replace one community that's one-dimensional with a holistic community that's Christ-centered. That's what you do. Jonathan Haidt has this analogy of the rider and the elephant. And he says persuasion, the rider with a person is your rational mind. It's the mind that says 2 + 2 is 4. SEC is by far the superior football conference. All of the obvious facts of life, Nick Saban is the Darth Sidious of the SEC. All of these things that are just known. That's the rider. The elephant is everything else. It's everything else. It's your ethnicity, it's your family, it's your geography, it's your neighborhood, it's everything else. What Haidt says, if the elephant doesn't want to move, the rider isn't moving it. It's not going to move. But if the elephant wants to move, the rider is coming. And so one of the things and this is something that I struggle with, and I was actually better at it when I was litigating back in the day, was if you want to persuade somebody, talk to the elephant. How do you talk to the elephant? You love it. How do you talk? All of these things that are needs that we have: love, companionship, friendship, community, acceptance. That's what you do. David Brooks has this fantastic talk that he gives about his walk towards faith. And he talks about the difference between a ramp and a wall. And he says the Christian community is so good at creating so many ramps into the church. And ramp 1 is the love and fellowship that you see. Ramp 2 is the wonderful and marvelous worship. You would go through ramp after ramp after ramp. But then Christians are also really good at creating walls. And one of the walls right now, our political engagement with America is a wall, not a ramp. And how do we make it a ramp? And so when I think of people who are deeply engaged in conspiracies and deep partisanship, I think, how do I build ramps out of that? And it's usually not an argument. The argument or the discussion will come after they're walking on the ramp, but not before, if that makes sense.
That's a great answer. We're running out of time. Could you talk briefly on the article that just came out this morning about Leah Thomas? Mm-hmm. And if you could sort of help us understand some of the legal discussions happening there, and then let us know where we can sort of follow up more.
Sure.
I'm glad to talk about your book, but you're also welcome to talk about your book.
Yeah. Well, a lot of book themes were in the talk tonight. But so do you all know who Leah Thomas is? This is the swimmer.
William.
Okay.
William Thomas.
Okay. Well, I don't know what the legal name is, but whatever.
William.
Okay. So the question is, So here's the question. When people are making the argument that a transgender swimmer should be able to participate in women's sports, isn't that just a straightforward legal equal protection kind of argument? Okay, so what I wanted to write about was, I wanted to write to people to try to help people understand what the American conception of legal equality is, and why the American conception of legal equality means that Thomas should not be in that meet. Okay. And what it goes to is American history. If you go back in American history, although the Declaration of Independence said all men are created equal, the original Constitution did not contain any sort of formal legal requirement of equality. And it's one of the things that maintained slavery, for example. So after the Civil War, we passed some what were called the Civil War Amendments. And one of the core elements of the 14th Amendment is this phrase, equal protection under the law. Okay? So what does equal protection under the law mean? It does not mean all people are treated equally by the law in all respects. So that doesn't, if that was the case, then 9-year-olds could get driver's licenses, right? Men's and women's sports in public universities would be unlawful because you're sex segregated. What it actually means is similarly situated people shall be treated alike. That's what equal protection under the law means. So that's why race discrimination is completely unlawful, because there is no meaningful difference between black and white, Hispanic, Asian, when it comes to anything, like related to a job, related to access to a movie theater, because race is not a meaningful characteristic that should distinguish one person from another in the eyes of the law. Sex is different. Sex has always been viewed as relevant in many circumstances. That's why we can have men's restrooms and women's restrooms. That's why we have men's sports and women's sports. Because there are many ways, not all ways, but many ways in which men and women are not similarly situated. Okay, are y'all with me? So if you're making a legal argument and you're making an argument about athletic competition, somebody who's transgender, even if they're saying I'm a trans woman, is not similarly situated to a biological female for all of the reasons why we have different men's and women's sports. If you're talking about access to intimate spaces like locker rooms, they're not similarly situated in the same way that men and women are not similarly situated. So the equal protection rule should not apply, and in fact protects women, biological women, from the dissimilar person. Y'all with me? Okay? So, but at the same time, what we have to acknowledge, and this is where a lot of, I think, Christians begin to sort of get in a very reflexively anti-transgender mode, is there are situations where transgender people are similarly situated. So let's say somebody is a transgender employee of an insurance company, and this person is selling insurance like crazy. I mean, customers like them, they sell the insurance, and then they get a new manager, and the manager does not like transgender people, and so fires this person. Well, that's an equality issue, because what was the relevant characteristic of the person? It was not whether or not they were trans, it was were they a person who could do the job. In that respect, they're similarly situated to any other employee. But if you take that same person and you put them on a basketball court or in a locker room or in a swimming pool, they're not similarly situated. And so that's why a lot of this gets lost, and you're either all the way for what are the demands of transgender Americans, or you're all the way against. And what I think of as the original purpose of equal protection is to protect similarly situated people and treat them alike. So where transgender people are similarly situated to anyone else, we should protect their equality. Where they're not similarly situated, then it's a different situation. That makes sense. That's kind of a deep dive into constitutional law, but it's rooted in Judeo-Christian moral principles of justice, of treating people, of equal treatment. But equal treatment does not mean you get to do whatever you want. Equal treatment has a sort of a deeper and more complicated meaning than that.
The next part of our program will take place downstairs in the fellowship hall, where David will be available to sign books, copies of Divided We Fall, $10 a pop. That's half price from retail, so grab them. I think we've got about 20, 25 copies, and he'll be glad to sign for you. You have the little white card. If you got an email from me about the series, you're on the list. If you did not get an email from me, please, if you wish to be notified, put your email address on this and drop it in one of the offering boxes. One is at the end of the center aisle here. There's another one situated near the elevator and stairs that go downstairs to the fellowship hall. Last but not least, this series has largely been made possible by a gift from my late parents, whose picture you see. I've been instructed that's not an altar, it's a table. Sorry, high church is coming through here. Chris and Mary Jane Carper. That is not a bottomless supply of funds to put these events on. So, if you feel moved to do so, we'll take a Jefferson, we'll take a Grant, we'll take a Jackson while you've got them. Or if you wish to write a check to Cornerstone Presbyterian Church, that would be great as well. And on the subject line, simply put ECS. Those funds will be used strictly for the sponsorship of our next event in March 2023, when Dr. John Woody from Emory Law School will be with us to talk about the Supreme Court and religious liberty cases, which we've gotten a little bit of a preview here this evening. So, with that, again, one other item. On that white card, actually all of you could do this. You'll notice down at the bottom it says, where did you learn about this event? We'd like to know how our advertising worked. You can check poster, word of mouth, member of the church, social media, or multiple, if that's the case. And again, drop them in those boxes at the end of this aisle or by the elevator. There are cookies and nuts and punch waiting for you downstairs. David would like to continue his conversations with you. And Joshua, would you close for us, please?
Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you that our unity in Christ it binds us together. We thank you what we have heard from your word, many of us from pulpits this morning, but reminded again tonight that you are building your church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So, Lord Jesus, we thank you that you are our King, King of kings and Lord of lords. We thank you for answers to prayer for this event. We pray you continue to bless David, and we thank you for the many saints and guest visitors who came to be with us tonight. God, would you help us to be the best citizens this nation has ever seen, because we love you supremely, and we love everything else much, much further down the list. Father, we love you. Thank you for this night, and we pray you would dismiss us now with your blessing. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah, give David a second to make it downstairs, but then you can exit those doors and take a left and go downstairs. You'll be in our fellowship hall. Thank you.
Over here, and Karen's going to take it downstairs.